All right. Welcome to another podcast episode with Petronella Cybersecurity Live. Got Aaron and BJ on the line, and we're going to talk about Biden's order around cybersecurity.
Yes, it came out March 21st, so a couple days ago. But we were talking about it, and we just noticed it, and because we just noticed it, we kind of felt like maybe we should spread some awareness about it because it's really important information, and also has really good information in it as well, how to harden your security. So we wanted to talk about that. Craig, do you want to read it? BJ, do you have it up?
Yeah, I can read it. So basically, there is a fact sheet that says act now to protect against potential cyber attacks. And I won't read the whole thing. I'll put the link in the notes. But basically, to get to the summarized bulleted list, it says we urge companies to execute the following steps with urgency. Mandate the use of multi-factor authentication, or MFA, on your systems to make it harder for attackers to get onto your system. Deploy modern security tools on your computers and devices to continuously look for and mitigate threats. Check with your cybersecurity professionals to make sure that your systems are patched and protected against all known vulnerabilities, and change passwords across your networks so that previously stolen passwords are useless to malicious actors. Back up your data and ensure that you have offline backups beyond the reach of malicious actors. Run exercises and drill your emergency plans so that you're prepared to respond quickly to minimize the impact of any attack. Encrypt your data so it cannot be used if it's stolen. Educate your employees on common tactics that attackers will use over email or through websites, and encourage them to report if their computers or phones have shown unusual behavior, such as unusual crashing or operating very slowly. Engage proactively with your local FBI field office or CISA regional office to establish relationships in advance of any cyber incidents. Please encourage your IT and security leadership to visit the websites of CISA and the FBI, where they'll find technical information and other useful resources. And he goes on to say that we must continue to bolster our cybersecurity over the long term, building security into your products from the ground up, bake it in, don't bolt it on, protecting your intellectual property and your customers' privacy. Develop software only on a system that's highly secure and accessible only to those actually working on a particular project. This will make it much harder for any intruder to jump from system to system and compromise a product or steal your intellectual property. Use modern tools to check for known and potential vulnerabilities. Developers can fix most software vulnerabilities if they know about them. There are automated tools that can review code and find most coding errors before software ships, and before a malicious actor takes advantage of them. Software developers are responsible for all code used in their products, including open source code. Most software is built using many different components and libraries, much of which is open source. Make sure developers know the provenance or origin of components that they're using, and have a software bill of materials in case one of the components is later found to have a vulnerability, so you can rapidly correct it. Implement the security practices mandated in the President's executive order, improving our nation's cybersecurity pursuant to that executive order. All software the U.S. government purchases is now required to meet security standards, and how it's built and deployed. We encourage you to follow these practices more broadly. So let's kind of take it from the top. Obviously, multi-factor authentication, we've talked about MFA for a while now. You definitely want to leverage it with any websites that you frequent, like iCloud for Apple devices or Google. But take that to the next level too. If you have an organization and you're not leveraging multi-factor for daily logins to your endpoints, that's something to certainly research and look into. And if you need help, reach out to us and we'll certainly point you in the right direction. We have vetted and tested tools that address MFA at all different levels. So what I mean by that is if you walk up to your Windows or your Mac computer and you're not using MFA and you're in a business environment, it's very important to explore solutions that that can give you that extra security layer. And then he goes on to say the modern security, deploy modern security tools. They're obviously not going to list out what a modern security tool is, but as we've said in many episodes now around XDR and stock services and EDR and different types of technology layers, that's really what he means. So if you don't have those modern technologies in place, now's definitely the time to do that. And we talked about this before too, don't blend the role of IT and cyber. You probably have an IT person that you work with, and that's great, but you may not have a cyber person, or you may not have a cybersecurity company. And it's really important that you have a cybersecurity company to do that risk assessment and Pentest and the job functions that a cybersecurity provider excels at, and then communicates the results of that to you and to your IT team or person so that they can fill the gaps, and then scan it again and do another test to make sure that all the gaps have been filled. How's that sound to you guys so far?
I mean, that sounds like exactly what we've been saying, as you mentioned.
Yep.
It's just, I feel like I'm in a time warp though. I feel like this message must have come out 20 years ago, surely.
Well, this stuff is really best practice for quite some time, but people just aren't doing it. And if they were doing it, then we wouldn't see the headlines that we see.
Yeah.
So it's
what's unfortunate is that there's not more sharing and transparency of information regarding the threats, because people, even people in your IT department, right? Because IT people are not cybersecurity people. It's like IT is like the groundwork of, the framework, and then cybersecurity is like all the holes in it, right? Like all the things that could go wrong. They're two totally different things. They're coming from two totally different perspectives. So a lot of your IT departments don't even realize like what all the cyber risks are. And like, here's something, like I just found this, the article that you're reading from, the statement you're reading from has tons of links in it. And by clicking, I got to cisa.gov, and it's a report that they did, and they built the report on the MITRE framework, MITRE, which we know that our favorite XDR tool uses that as the open source code to build the algorithms upon for the extended detection and response tool. But it says here, and I've never heard this before, I don't know if you guys have, but it says that one of the techniques that attackers are using right now is a pass the cookie attack. So like, we talked about cookies a few weeks ago and how they're just kind of everywhere. Like the web is like Hansel and Gretel, there's just cookies and breadcrumbs all over the place. But like, this should be like, we should be hearing about this pass the cookie attack. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think maybe if people were more aware of all the attacks and the tactics that were being used, that maybe it would help them to, better frame it in their minds, like as far as like where their vulnerabilities are.
Yeah, I would encourage listeners to go back to that podcast because we did some good information around cookies, but I'll just kind of summarize. I mean, especially nowadays, when you log on to a website like PayPal, for example, or Facebook or whatever, don't click the box that says trust this device, because what that does is it puts a cookie on your computer, and then it won't prompt you for authentication for the next 15 or 30 days, depending on the settings of the provider. But the reason that I don't advise clicking that box is because if that cookie is compromised on your computer due to malware or some other bad actor, well, now they could just circumvent your authentication process and get in as you. So especially now with the way things are heightened, definitely don't make it easy, right? I mean, yeah, it's a little less convenient that you're going to have to authenticate every single time you open that application or whatever, but it also is more secure.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note too, we're saying these things not to scare people, but to empower people. These threats are real. Especially right now, it's on a high alert, and it's, we're not just saying that because we're cybersecurity, we're saying that because it's important to our national security that people do this.
Take these actions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so like I said with the cookies, I mean, you definitely don't want to make things easier, but I think the reality is that a lot of people, they just don't have a good grasp and good visibility into the current state of their endpoints and if they truly are secure or not, which is why we keep saying to go do these risk assessments and leverage technology like XDR and these other layers to make sure you do get a better grasp of that. But yeah, definitely take this order from Biden as a wake-up call. And
well, yeah, and here let's just dig a little deeper. And full disclosure from us, like, yeah, we're a cybersecurity company, and we're here, if you want to, get a hold of a cybersecurity professional, but monetary gain is not our motivation. Like, we all expect to be rich off crypto by next month. No, so we're not worried about that. But we really do want to help secure the nations, because all of our children and loved ones live here, right? So this is very personal for us. And that's a true statement. And so this is alarming to me when I read this, because in the list of recommendations that they're giving, number one is MFA, right? And then they say to use modern cyber tools and contact a cyber professional. But here's why a cyber professional is so important and why it made that list. Because who really is equipped to deal with something like this? It says CISA verified that the threat actors successfully signed into one user's account with proper multi-factor authentication. In this case, CISA believes the threat actors may have used browser cookies to defeat MFA with a pass the cookie attack. So if the number one recommendation is MFA, but pass the cookie attacks can defeat MFA, this is also so complicated, and it's also serious because our lives have now become attached to the cyber realm. And so this is just really, really serious now. It's just at that point, because cookies are, we in the example that we talked about the other day, we were just talking about one music service, right? Spotify, that just as an example. And this is just one example to put it in a proper reference for people. But in their section, I was reading through about cookies, and I learned a lot about cookies that I didn't know, but there's all different types of cookies and levels of cookies and things that cookies do. And I guess if we were to look at this on a whiteboard and count the cookies and then knowing that there's past the cookie attacks, we have this is really something that you really need help with, probably,
Yeah. So, obviously we're talking about Biden's recommendations here on this bulleted list of things to do, and we'll kind of zero a little deeper into the multi-factor or MFA. We've talked about MFA a lot in previous episodes, but one of the things that I recommend is to avoid MFA with what's called an SMS text message because of a SIM swap attack. So you definitely want to try to use Google or Microsoft Authenticator when using MFA. But with the example that BJ just gave, if you use Authenticator with Google, for example, but you check the box to say, look, don't prompt me or authenticate me or don't bother me for 30 days. Well, now that cookie's on your system, and that's how they can bypass even the authenticator type solutions, because you're giving authorizations to circumvent the prompt to authenticate by allowing the usage of a cookie, but you're also saying that you've done the due diligence and you're confident that your system is safe and secure and not being breached in any way. So that's why I recommend do not check that box, so that you could harden your system a little bit, and then obviously do the scans and do the other work to make sure. But try to use that Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator with as many different types of solutions and websites that you can, because that's much more secure than SMS text. And
I think
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, I was thinking too, one thing that this really highlights, this this fact sheet, is another thing that we've been repeating over and over again, which is just how important it is to layer your cybersecurity. So like BJ mentioned, if somebody was able to get in with the MFA, okay, great. But if you have something like XDR or even a good antivirus or something, it's not going to catch everything, but it'll help. It'll help even if it does get past this initial layer of defense. If you have multiple layers, it's going to stop them at the next gate, basically. So it's like having, if you can think about it like that, it's like having 22, with the patented 22 layer or whatever, having multiple, protections. It's just more gates that people have to pass through, more locks that they have to unlock.
Such a good point, Aaron, because like if you recall yesterday when we were just briefly, I mean, because I like to mention something that's, very cutting edge in each of our podcasts just as food for thought. But yesterday we were talking about the breakthrough that Microsoft had with topological qubits. And the science of topological qubits is that it's kind of like a braided, like a woven design. And it's the same concept as what we're talking about right now. There's such an effectiveness when you have that type of a design, because it's like it's just like a shield almost, and then like in topological qubits, quantum information can be stored there. And from a cybersecurity perspective, it's like your security is woven, you know what I mean, in layers. And that XDR layer, the reason that it is so critical is because you have that X factor that no one can really define or properly measure. Like there is no accurate system of metrology when it comes to machine learning, because it's a huge question mark. And we just don't know the potential. But if you have something that has a neural network and it has the ability to learn from a machine learning perspective, like an XDR tool on your network, the thing is that it's going to learn what's normal for your network. It's going to learn because like I can see that with my smart home. My smart home has started to change how it interacts with me, because it's learned kind of what's normal for my home, what sounds are normal and things like that. Because I have the settings turned up to, to pay attention all the time. So it alerts me if there's a cough or like, just things like that with presence sensing. Just to teach it. And it is learning. It's learning what's normal for me. And the same thing goes with an XDR tool. It learns what's normal for your network. So although it's not coded with programming language to look for everything, because we don't know every threat yet, it does have the ability to learn what's normal on your network. And then when something out of place happens, even if it's not coded to look for that specifically, it can still see a pattern of something unusual. And that's where this thing can really be effective for people.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think the other thing is that even with these bulleted lists here, you have to really put in multiple layers at each bullet too, because I think, BJ, a lot of people don't have that figured out as far as what is the visibility, what is normal for their network, because they don't have some of these technologies. So I think, the first step is got to start somewhere, right? So start with the risk assessment, go through, figure out your gaps, adopt some of these technologies like, modern solutions like XDR, EDR, things that are above and beyond traditional antivirus and firewalls. But, like I said, with the MFA, you want to make sure that the password is not a breached password too. So you need to use a complex, secure password. And we talked about that a lot of times as far as using password managers and the reasons why we recommend them, especially a reputable one, and then pairing the password manager with another layer, which is typically a hardware token layer. So you have to assume the worst, right? And you have to assume that, okay, they got my password. But you as the consumer or the business owner can take that power into your own hands and come up with some type of policy for yourself, or practice where I'm going to change my password every month, or whatever frequency. Obviously more often is best, but sometimes too frequent can be annoying too. So you got to kind of come up with that delicate balance, is my point. But I think a lot of people are still using breached passwords, so obviously change your passwords. But then going another step, well, what if you have a keylogger on your system? And we've talked about the importance of keystroke encryption. So you should have a keystroke encryption solution on your device, because if you've got malware and a keylogger on your system and you go change your passwords, well, if the keylogger's exfiltrating that information, well, guess what? The bad actors have that too. So you want to try to make this as hard as possible. So, adopt the keystroke encryption first, then change your passwords after that layer's in place, and then do your MFA, and then, you know what I mean? Like, so you have these different layers at each of these bullet points. And it's the same thing, with the modern tools and technology. Most people listening probably know what antivirus is. There are different levels of antivirus, but don't trust just one vendor and one level. On our systems, when we protect our companies, we use over 59 different vendor filters. We don't trust one company and say, oh, well, you said it's clean. We look at as many as possible. So on email alone filtering, we're looking at 59 different vendors.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you have to assume that with every vendor and every piece of technology, you have to assume just from a scientific perspective that there's the law of averages says that there's going to be a certain degree of error.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So like when you get a pen test done, for example, that pen tester might use a certain set of tools. Well, another pen tester might have a different methodology and use different tools. And that's why it's always important to have different perspectives and using different tools and different people and different methodology, because different people and different tools will find different things, and the reports will never ever be the same.
That's such a good point you make, because again, along the lines, like, we're in complete agreement with what Biden is saying, right? That you have to use MFA. That's not a catch-all, but it's very helpful. And then using the most modern cybersecurity tools, because again, one of the things they specifically say in this report that CISA says is paramount is to first establish a baseline. Now, when you're trying to establish a baseline in anything, mathematics, physics, cybersecurity, stock market charts, when you're trying to establish a baseline, you want to gather as much data as possible and then look for patterns. And that's something that a human mind is not capable of doing at this point, as good as an algorithm can do. Why are so many crypto traders successful? Because of algorithms, right? That can establish baselines, and they can establish patterns, and they can see patterns, and they can predict trends. And so that's where these modern tools he's talking about, while he's not naming the tools specifically, that's where these tools really shine, because you may not be able to establish a baseline. Like, how can you gather enough data and know what patterns to look for at such a vast level of telemetry, going so deep into the network, into all the IoT connected devices? Good luck establishing an accurate baseline without the help of modern tools.
Yeah, but I think and that's good, but I think that the order of these bullets is a little bit off as well. Like, for example, if you do the MFA first, and then you deploy these tools, and then you check with your cyber professional, and then you back up your data, that's not necessarily the best order. So obviously back up your data first, and then when you back up your data, don't rely on one vendor. Use multiple vendors, and maybe take the data into your own hands and buy an external hard drive and back up yourself, so you have the data tangibly in your hands. And then after you back up, then patch your systems, because patches, guess what? They crash things sometimes and they don't work. So you don't want to back up at layer 5 of this bulleted list, or whatever, or number 4 of this list, and then you're screwed after you just patched. And people will say, well, I followed the Biden's order. You know what I mean? So my point is that you have to think about.
Are you saying, Craig? Are you saying that when, like, for an example, if you're trying to build a pyramid, don't put the capstone at the bottom and then?
But what I'm saying is that while these are great recommendations and I agree with them, the order of them is important, and I don't agree with the order. Is my point. And that's why, really, if you want to get this done the right way, you should really call a cyber professional first, and then come up with a game plan. And your next thing to do would probably be back up everything, get that foundation, and then
help point you in the direction of an offline backup solution if you want to take it.
That's my point. But I wouldn't do it necessarily in the order that's given here on this website.
That's a really good point, and that makes a big difference, because if you build this cyber structure based off the order listed versus the order that you're suggesting, you're going to have two different end results. Two different outputs.
Well, and also
a higher caliber quality.
Yeah, and one thing to think about too is that if you contact a cybersecurity expert, people are probably afraid they're going to spend a lot of money, but you're actually probably going to end up saving money by calling a cybersecurity expert, because, especially, like us, for example, we vet all of the solutions that we give. So, you don't want to waste your time, throwing spaghetti at the wall waiting for something to stick. You know what I mean? Like, you're just wasting money.
You're absolutely right. And that conversation or that process could be priceless, because if you hire that expert, that expert uncovers issues, well, maybe you say, well, I already backed up. Well, I've talked about this many, many times too. People think that they backed up, and they might have bought software, they might have done something, but they never thought to test the backup. And we always recommend drills and testing. And you may discover, I backed up some stuff, but I didn't back up everything that I need. Or maybe you forgot about your website and you didn't back up your website. Or, there's all these different things that are part of your company, if you're a business owner, or even at home. people forget to back up their kids' photos, or they thought they had them backed up, but they didn't, or they assumed that Dropbox or whatever program they were using was doing the backup. But then guess what? Maybe an update came out and it broke that, and they didn't think to check it. And then before you know it, and this is a true story, this has happened many times before, we were hired to do data recovery. And data recovery, folks, is super expensive. And people will often say to me, I just need that one folder or that one file. It doesn't work that way.
It's stuck in a labyrinth.
All or nothing with data recovery. You have to literally bring that hard drive. You have to take everything apart, bring that hard drive in a clean room. You have to assess the situation, see why the hard drive failed or crashed. Then you have to repair it. All this has to be done in a clean room environment, because if one little dust, bunny gets on there, then the whole thing goes south. My point is that you can't just get that one file.
Right.
Avoid that whole costly process and back up the right way.
Right. And look, here's something for people to consider. This announcement by Biden is relevant to the situation because of the Ukraine crisis, putting us at elevated risk of cyber attack by foreign threats. But as we know, as Aaron says, a pound of prevention or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Now, listen to this. We all know that quantum computing, now, I don't think people understand the degree that this is taking off at. Like, there was a report yesterday about this is one of the most explosive industries right now. And there's literally like $21 billion being funneled into it by all these assortments of companies. Well, here's the problem, right? Because quantum computers are going to be available, and they already are to a certain extent. That they're not they're not ready to just be fully functional yet, but for set purposes, they can be used already, and they're advancing so quickly. Now, when it comes to cybersecurity, if you have bad actors with a quantum computer in their hand that they try to use just for the sole purpose of doing certain things on your network, right? These layers are critical now, and here's why. So I was watching a video last night from this company called D-Wave, and they merge classical computers with quantum computers to perform certain functions. And I was talking to my lovely chatbot about this, and her comment was, oh, I love quantum tunneling. And I'm like, what does she mean by that? So I look up quantum tunneling just for the official definition to try to, decide what is this about. And it's, basically about wavelengths getting through barriers, right? And these systems are already happening. You can use these systems already. Like, you can pay the companies and you can use their quantum systems, right? Bad people can get these in their hands. And then when you have them trying to do very sophisticated attacks against you, right? A layered approach to cybersecurity is going to be your only, like your shield. Like, put your shields up now. This quantum computing thing is taking off. Put your shields up now. Don't wait until it's too late.
Yeah, definitely do the drills too. I mean, one of the bullets says to run exercises and drill your emergency plan so you're prepared to respond quickly, right? But it's just like the same thing with the backups. You got to drill your backup plan. You got to drill, well, what happens in a ransomware attack? Have you done a ransomware simulation to see what happens? How does that impact you? How does that impact your work? How does that impact your employees? Have you ever done what's called an incident response tabletop exercise and go through your incident response plan and your disaster recovery plan? So, all of these things go back to policies. And if you don't have policies for all these things, well, guess what? You need to start. To start somewhere, right? So you need to start writing the policies, and then you need to adapt the policy to the controls, and tailor them to your environment, so that it's not a matter of this will happen to you one day. This will happen. You have to do the preparation now, because if you don't do anything and you just ignore it, the pain level is going to be so high. And I've talked about this before. I mean, sadly, for businesses that go through this, I mean, the stats are millions of dollars, and the damages most small businesses can't afford, so they just go out of business. And I'm not saying that to be a fear monger. I'm saying that's the reality of the world.
It's just reality. You're just telling the truth. Like, these threats are escalating, guys. They're not getting any lesser. They're escalating. And as the equipment and the technology and the science behind computing gets more advanced, the threat level increases in tandem, and sometimes even exponentially. And before we close, Craig, maybe you can give a tidbit of advice to people, because one of the things I'm seeing as a theme here in this CISA report is a major problem with hackers exploiting mail forwarding rules. And you don't hear much about that, but this is CISA seems to be really drilling this as a problem. And they're saying that sometimes they even recommend turning mail forwarding rules off because they're getting access to the forwarding and they're forwarding your emails, on their own. So what advice would you give people in that regard?
Yeah, so I remember that made me remember an incident where we were hired to do forensics for what's called business email compromise, BEC. So what happened was the victim, it was a business, and they were breached by a phishing email. And what the attacker did was they tricked the user into providing their login credentials. In this case, it was to Google G Suite, and they set up a page that looked like it came from Google. They tricked the user into logging in. It was not real, so they gave their credentials to the bad actor. It did not throw any red alarms or anything. The bad actors came in. They set up forwarding rules in the Gmail account in the G Suite to forward all the communications to them, to their email. So they were reading all the emails for a period of months of time. And that's what they're talking about. So there's forwarding rules that are on all different systems, Microsoft Office 365, Google G Suite, etc. So you have to, number one, obviously make sure MFA is enabled so that people can't, if they trick you to give over your credentials, at least you have the MFA layer, right? But it goes back to training. Obviously, train and test yourself and your staff and go through the drills of training and attestation and certificates of completion. But the forwarding rules will allow anyone that successfully authenticates to send and spy on all your email communications. And this could be done on just your email, or whoever, could spider out into the rest of the company. And before you know it, that's how these bad actors gather all this information and treasure trove of intellectual property, and it becomes a nightmare.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, when that happens, is that going to be in a send receive folder, or in the sent folder? Would that?
Not necessarily. So rules could be set to cover tracks, and in this case, they were set to cover their tracks. So no, it wouldn't be in the sent. It basically was at a higher level where any mails that were coming in were immediately forwarded to another address, but they weren't in the sent folder because it wasn't really a sent email from that user.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what CISA is saying here too, that they're using forwarding, like mail forward rule creation to send your emails, especially with certain keywords like financial keywords and stuff,
yes,
to send it, and that it says here that they're forwarding messages received by the users, specifically messages with certain phishing related keywords, to the legitimate user's really simple syndication RSS feeds or RSS subscriptions folder in an effort to prevent warnings from being seen by the legitimate users.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is why it's important to use encrypted email too. If you've got vendors that you do business with, and maybe you have to do wire transfers or move money and stuff like that, you can set what's called trusted circles so that bad actors, they can't. That's another layer of security, right? It's like another force field, so to speak. But they're not going to get in through that with a phishing email. So you have like a trusted circle of only your vendors, and then only those communications go back and forth. And then you also have the encryption layer that further protects you. So it's all about the layers.
Yep, it's about the layers and knowing, like that old saying that Socrates said, "Know thyself," and it really relates to cybersecurity. Know thy network, right? Establish your baseline, because unless you can measure something, you cannot improve upon it. If you don't know, like if I want to lose weight, I need to know where I'm at today so that I can set my goals. So know your network, like just know your network and then start to improve upon it. But establish your baseline.
Yeah, knowledge is power, and
it truly is. Yeah, it's actionable intelligence. Knowledge is actionable intelligence, and that's where you can actually create change with it.
Yeah, and I keep thinking, going back to the layers, and I keep thinking of like a fortress, right? Like a castle. One thing to think about, if you only have one layer, let's say you have a moat around your castle, right?
Yep.
But you don't have any military or army, to back it up. If somebody gets past that moat, they're going to be able to get in, right?
Right.
But if you have that moat and you have like a tall wall and you have an army and you have cannons, all these extra layers, even if they do get past like the first layer or whatever, you're going to have backup. So it's important to think about what could happen right? And then find a solution to whatever could happen. So,
Yeah.
That's why those drills and exercises are so
Yes.
important, that I was saying, like with the incident response and the disaster recovery, the tabletop exercises, because you have to think about it, and you don't just do it one time, you do it from different perspectives and
Yes.
scenarios. So you assume, okay, so let's say you're using Microsoft, and you're using Microsoft OneDrive, for example, and maybe you use that for business, and that comes with Office 365. Okay, that's great. But did you know that Microsoft they're not responsible for data? Did you know that OneDrive is not backing you up? A lot of people don't know that. And it's not just Microsoft. All the big providers typically hold themselves harmless in their terms and conditions, where they say, look, we're not responsible for your data. That's on you. So how many listeners out there are using Microsoft or Google or Amazon or different products that are out there off the shelf, but then assuming in their brain, oh, well, that big company's backing up? No, you have to take that upon yourself. And if you're not taking those layers upon yourself, when they get hacked, because they do, the big ones get hacked too. It's not just, a lot of the big myth was only the big ones get hacked. Well, that's not true. But my point is that assume the worst and go through that exercise. Assume that Microsoft's hacked. Assumes you can't log in. What do? How do you get your data? What other redundancies do you have in place? And then you have to assume that, okay, well, I have this extra redundancy. I'm going to use, this system to back up. Well, then you have to, keep doing that in your company and keep checking all these different layers. Like Aaron was saying with the moat and the cannons and all these different layers. Well, try to find those single points of failure and eliminate them.
yeah. And also, I think, what is that one overlay, the Microsoft Office what is it? The
GCC High.
Yes. Another thing that I thought was really noteworthy about that, people are doing that for CMMC, NIST, DFARS, all that, but they don't even encrypt anything, do they?
Well, GCC High does have encryption. It's not the most strong end-to-end encryption, but it does leverage encryption. But there's limitations to the GCC High platform, where if you're not part of the ecosystem, it doesn't work. So like both sides have to be part of the ecosystem, and the usability or the workflow may or may not work for certain companies, because that's a pretty tight loop there. There's always a tool for the right tool for the job, so to speak, right? In my opinion, GCC High is an expensive solution for most companies. For really large companies, maybe it's a good fit. But, for anybody dealing with sensitive information, you cannot use any kind of commercial product unless it's been security hardened specifically. And I mean that in Amazon's world, in Google's world, everything. Mm-hmm. If you're not using, like Amazon has GovCloud, you have to use GovCloud if you're dealing with sensitive, in this case, CMMC, CUI information. You can't use just regular Amazon. You have to use the GovCloud platform. And it's the same with Microsoft. GCC High is their hardened, more secure offering. The commercial products like Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Office 365 commercial, those are not compliant. So a lot of people don't know that either, And then guess what? There's no migration path. So you got to build and architect a whole new solution in that more secure environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and along those lines, if you're out there and you kind of feel lost in a sea of all this, because it's a lot of stuff. A good starting point just might be a pen test, because then when you do a pen test, that's invaluable information, because you're literally engaging people that have the same level of expertise, if not higher, than the bad guys, that can poke around in your network and your devices and see what they uncover, because then, it's a lot. It's just a lot more fruitful if you know your vulnerabilities and you can patch them before someone else finds them,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think maybe we can get more into that like tomorrow. I think that would be a great topic, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily see the value in a pen test or an assessment. And again, kind of talking
we've done pen tests against, we won't name any names, obviously, but very large financial institutions that have a big presence, all right, in a certain geographical area, and lots of pages and pages and pages and pages of vulnerabilities that we discovered. And so, and this is like high tech equipment, like huge IT department, a whole cyber department, and pages of vulnerabilities we delivered to them, right? So this is the state of things. And it's just, there's no price tag that you can put on proper preparation. But to end on a good note, this is a lot of stuff and it's a lot to worry about. But, the bright side is that anything you go through that's difficult can yield really good positive outcomes. You hear lots of people talking about like, the rise of AI and this metaverse and virtual reality. And if you really think about it along those lines, we're heading in that direction. The cyber realm is their space, right? And so doing your due diligence to, take your area of cyberspace seriously and secure it. I would assume that, and when you form that shield, if you tighten that shield enough and harden your security enough, eventually that shield might look more like a spark from the distance, and you might position yourself in a very good way. So it's just a really good idea to take cybersecurity seriously now, because it's not just you that depends on the security of your network.
Well, yeah, and speaking too of the pen test and the assessment and things like that, and you're saying that you can't put a price tag on it, but also kind of going back to what I was saying before, if you do a pen test, kind of like contacting a cybersecurity specialist before you implement a whole bunch of things that are incorrect, it's the same thing with an assessment. It's just like going to the doctor, and getting a physical before you have something, before you come up with a solution, right? Because you don't necessarily know what's wrong until you get an overview of everything, and knowing where your vulnerabilities are, that's a great place to start, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't know, what's the first step in the scientific process is identifying the problem, right? So you have to do some discovery to identify where exactly you need to harden your security. Yeah, and I think that's also important, and that's something that people miss a lot.
And I think even before step one, this is my last comment, even before step one of that scientific process of identify the problem, I'd say there's a step zero, and that's just observe. Like, for how many years have we been using the internet, and we've really not paid it any attention from a perspective of hygiene and keeping it in a good state, in a pristine state. So now it's time to really observe, like turn around and look into your network, the background of your network, and observe it and start to pay attention to it and establish your baseline and have a starting point. But we really need to start paying attention to these topics. They've been under the rug and on the back burner for too long, and it's part of the reason why we're in this situation.
Yeah, one of the last things I'll say before we end for the day is, sometimes I'll get customers or potential prospects that tell me, well, Craig, I've been running my business for 25 years and I've never been hacked. Well, that's the biggest myth in the book too. I mean, the reality is you probably were hacked. You just don't know that you've been hacked, and you don't know because not all hackers do damage or reveal themselves. They don't always throw a red flag and show you, oh, look, you've been hacked. We dropped ransomware. Some hackers are looking to steal data. They could have stole the data years ago. You could have been breached several times over, or you can still be breached. And if you don't have the technology and the expertise in place at the human layer around people, process, and technology, you've already been pawned. You've already been hacked.
Because the hackers are layered as well. And they have, depending on the group or the individual you're dealing with, they have different priorities and different goals. And some of them want notoriety and want to do destruction. And some of them just want to be stealthy. They want to never be found out. They want you to never know what they did so they can come back again and again and again. And where you say you've never been hacked, you just may be hacked so consistently that it just seems normal to you. You don't know what's going on. So you have to observe your background and, establish your baseline.
And if you've been hacked and you have been a victim of ransomware, there is a high probability that you'll get hacked again, because hackers do go back and see if there's been a change in security. Yeah. And we've been hired several times from customers that they called us for incident response to help them, and then they don't listen to the recommendations and do nothing, and they just go about their business because they think it's too expensive or too intense for them.
Yeah.
They get hacked.
Yeah. Hey, with power comes responsibility, right? And the internet is kind of like a sea of potential, but if you're not paying attention to it and taking care of it, it can quickly become a cesspool.
Yep.
And I'll leave on this. This is one of my all-time favorite quotes. I think it's a good one. It's actually by Robert Mueller, the old head of the FBI. He says there are only two types of companies, and this is years ago that he said this, right? There's only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. Even that is merging into one category.
Yeah.
Those that have been hacked and will be again.
Yeah. Yep, it's the state of things, but it's okay. It's no, you know, it's not doesn't have to be a bad thing. We just know that now we have to increase our level of diligence and responsibility in regards to being users of the internet.
Yep.
Exactly.
All right, guys. Thank you. I appreciate
Okay.
it. Tune in tomorrow for another episode.
All right,
All right.
guys.
See you later.
Bye.